Hey guys, this is Chris. If you follow my Instagram Shrimpery, you know that I'm setting up a new high-tech tank. So I want to make a little video detailing my general approach, what I'm using on it, and how you can set one up too. So every tank is different, and you might want to have a certain look, and that goes into the planning of a tank. But in some ways, when you do a high-tech tank, every setup is the same, in my opinion, in that you have to do certain things to ensure success later down the road. So I'm kind of going to go through each thing. So the first thing I do is pour the substrate. Before I put on the main substrate, I pour this ADA power sand. So I talk about this a little bit more in my other YouTube video, but if you get plants from somebody else's aquarium, I would advise treating them before putting them in your tank. And the reason for that is you don't want to catch whatever weird pests or algae they got going on in their aquarium. So here you can see I've added more substrate, some hardscape, some plants. I added ADA Amazonia soil, and I added ADA Colorado sand, which is like a reddish river sand. And then I also added some just aquascaping rocks to the mid-ground. So here I am planting the plants. I use these special aquascaping tweezers, and I just sort of push them pretty deep actually into the substrate such that just the top is pointing out, and I plant them dense. So when you start adding the water, you want to pour it on a piece of plastic or something like that, just so it doesn't destroy the substrate, muddy the water, mess up all the careful planting you've been doing. So one thing I should say is I prepared the water with an RODI filter that I have. It's from RO Buddy. I discussed this in my other video about maintenance, but the reason is I want really soft water and I really want to control the parameters. So you can see that despite my best efforts, I kind of disturbed the substrate a bit. I got some dirt on the sand, and the water's a little cloudy, but that's okay. The filter helped clear out the cloudiness after a couple days, but it's fully planted. You can see I was kind of doing like a redscape, and I just let the plants sort of hang out for a couple weeks to get established before my first trim. So a lot of people despair over the amount of algae they have during the initial stages. I'm not too scared of that. That just comes to the territory. But you can certainly exacerbate it by adding liquid ferts during the first 2 weeks when the substrate will be just dumping nutrients into the water. A lot of people ask me on my Instagram, do you really need to use CO2? You don't have to use it, but it definitely makes a huge difference as far as plant growth, plant health. If you want a really dense, vibrant, colorful tank, it helps to use it. So it doesn't have to be super expensive. I actually use really cheap Aquatech mini regulators. I think they're like $78. And then I use them with a 20-ounce CO2 canister that's used for paintball. And I have that on a timer attached to a ceramic diffuser in the tank. I measured the saturation of the CO2 with a drop checker. And I have that sort of aiming for like a yellowish greenish color. And I have all of it timed with the lights such that it comes on an hour before the lights. Once the tank is up and running, usually after like 2 weeks, I start adding my beloved Tropica Specialized Fertilizer. Highly recommended. It's a really good complete liquid fert with macro and micronutrients. And I just do 1 pump of that after each water change. So here you can see approximately a week and a half, 2 weeks after I first planted. I have some floating plants in there to soak up excess nutrients. And you can see some of the plants I planted that were from tissue culture starting to melt. That's okay because they'll regenerate. And everything's just settling in. So, in the first month or so after setup, that's really what's going to make or break your tank. If you're using an enriched substrate like ADA Amazonia, you really need to do, I start out in the first week with 50% water changes every day. Then the second week, 50% every other day. Third week, I'll do every 3 days. And then after that, after about a month or 3 weeks, you should be seeing less algae, less diatoms, and you should be good to go. My advice as far as trimming goes is to trim pretty frequently, leaving the existing stem in place. And you can replant the tips if you see any patchy places or whatever. But at each node where you trimmed, usually 2 or 3 new buds will start. And you eventually develop this bushy, healthy branching effect that looks really good. And that's how you get sort of like a really dense scape instead of straggly, stringy plants that you often see. Fast forward to, a month and a half after my initial planting, and voila, you can see the fruits of my labor. Everything looks pretty pretty healthy, dense, colorful. You can see I was going through this all red phase, but eventually got a little sick of that, and I decided to place the sand with a carpet. Having removed the sand, the water's a little cloudy here, but you can see the plants are really healthy. They've laid down really good root systems, some of which are exposed after removing the sand. You can see there's pretty much no algae. And so I replaced the sand with Amazonia Light, which has a little bit less nutrients that could leach into the water. And I planted a carpet of Monte Carlo, which is like a easier, smaller green carpeting plant. And I also added some wood with like moss, Java fern, etc. on it. Another really critical thing that perhaps I should have mentioned earlier in the video is you need a really good filtration system. I use external canister filters by Eheim, and those just ensure that I have really good water quality. As you stock your tank, you really want to think about keeping the biomass pretty low. If you have tons of fish in there for the size of the tank, you're just going to have a lot of algae from the excess waste. As far as light goes, I always say this, but don't be too afraid of light. I use really bright lights. I have a lot of natural light in my place, and I'm not too worried about it because I don't have tons of excess nutrients or waste in my tank that would lead to algae. All right, well, thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and go ahead and follow me on Instagram.com/shrimpery.